Welcome to a Week 9 edition of the RotoWire College Football Podcast, the Maurice Purify of college football podcasts. Nick Whalen back, as always, with RotoWire's college football guru, John McKechnie. John, we got stats back up on the site. Everything's running smoothly, except the Wisconsin Badgers will not be playing this weekend. Actually, probably a better scenario than Wisconsin playing this weekend with its fourth-string quarterback. I think Danny Vandenboom, who's from very close to where I'm from. That was a big deal in the local circles that he was potentially going to start.
Word.
The game ends up being called off, and that has incited, I think, digital riots, if there is such a thing, from Nebraska fans.
But what a week in Nebraska, and not even just college football, but a whole thing with Nebraska. But my goodness, they've been at odds with the Big Ten. It feels like this entire summer into the fall. We'll break off and play our own schedule if you cancel, and all this and that. And then, obviously the Big Ten gets it together, puts a schedule together. Obviously Wisconsin ends up getting too many cases. Apparently Nebraska went ahead and tried to get a game on with UT Chattanooga. Terrell Owens' university, go Mocs. But that's just a not great look. The Big Ten struck that down pretty vehemently. Nebraska's social media team had this tweet out of really embarrassing poll. Here's the direct poll from at Husker Sports with a blue check. It's time for tonight's Runza Twitter poll. If the roles were reversed and the Huskers had 6 players and six staff members sitting out with positive tests, would the game be played Saturday? Thinking face.
Man.
Retweet for a chance at a free Runza combo meal. So, a lot of people got in on that, and I just I can't believe an actual university ran it. I can see that from a message board community, oh, this is BS, shoes on the other foot, and we're definitely. But I mean, for an actual school's athletic program to tweet that out was, I didn't really know Nebraska was this ridiculous, but man, it's not looking great so far.
I feel like there wouldn't be this much of an urge for Nebraska to want to play this game if Wisconsin's first 2 quarterbacks weren't hurt. I think if Wisconsin was going to come in, Nebraska just lost by 35 last week against Ohio State. Not exactly, a momentum setting week 1 for them. Nope. But I think this now suddenly looks like such a winnable game for them that they're like, we have to play it. Of course we have to play it. And I don't know how Wisconsin, how these things spread throughout the team. Obviously there was the panic initially on Saturday when the Mertz report came out, and then all of a sudden Chase Wolf, who would have been the 3rd quarterback, also test positive. And then I think Paul Chryst himself also tested positive. Mm-hmm. If Wisconsin just went out of their way to infect enough players on the team so they didn't have to play this game, I wouldn't necessarily be against that strategy, because I don't know what would have happened with a 4th-string quarterback. And now we can maybe talk about what we saw in week 1 from Wisconsin, but Mertz was the story.
Yes,
only
please.
Had one
from where you're sitting, I want to hear how your Friday was.
Well, let me start with this. So we went to we had a group of I think 8 all Wisconsin alumni friends of mine in Milwaukee to watch the game, and we went to a local brewery that was enforcing social distancing, had tables spread out, no issues there. It was great. Had a nice view of the TV. They refused to put the sound on. They simply refused. And granted, the World Series was on. There was a game that night, but nobody was paying attention. Everyone was clearly there to watch the Badgers game, and I went up and very politely, as I've done a number of times, asked, hey, could you put the Jags game on? But all I was asking, hey, when the game starts,
Sir, Apollo 13 is playing with no sound on.
Well, I don't ever want to talk about that situation. But the lady just straight up denied me and gave me a little bit of attitude too. She's like, well, just so you know, not everyone's here to watch the game. Well, is everybody here to listen to this faint top 40 hits from 1995 playlist that's going on? It's not like any music was happening or people were feeling that either. So we watched the entire game without sound and subtitles, for the record. So that was not great. But Mertz was incredible. 20 of 21, 5 touchdowns, 248. What concerned me a little bit, and we kind of hit on this last week, is this Wisconsin running game. It's when you're throwing the ball the way that Wisconsin almost never does, you can't complain. And Wisconsin did get to almost 200 yards as a team, but it took 54 carries to get 182 yards. You had 3 running backs, Garrett Groshek, Nakia Watson, and Isaac Warrendo. None of the 3 really looked all that great. When's the last time Wisconsin has had a game where its longest rush was 13 yards? I think I was a little bit concerned Just the massive downgrade in talent from a Jonathan Taylor to that trio is something that I think, especially if they have to end up playing a few games without Graham Mertz, is something that could end up, really being an issue for Wisconsin.
That's it. Yeah, that's a great way of putting it. Like, you won't complain about the run game so much if you have Mertz dropping back and playing or giving you like elite quarterback play. But, it looks like there might be at least one game where Mertz has to sit out. You need to have that run game to, support a guy like Danny Vandenboom. So when Watson and Garendo and Groshek are just simply not moving it whatsoever, maybe Wisconsin takes a look at, some of the younger depth options, whether it's Jalen Berger or Julius Davis, whatever it might be. But I think pressing forward with those three guys is not going to be viable for very long. It can work against Illinois, and it can work when your quarterback throws 5 touchdowns and is basically perfect the entire night. But that occasionally won't happen. You will occasionally play teams that are better than Illinois. So they got to get that figured out. I think we do have that right, as like, if you have a big concern about Wisconsin beyond all the COVID stuff now, it's definitely the run game and the drop off from years past and basically the entire history of the Wisconsin program.
And you know what this comes back to? Not recruiting Ron Dane's son, who is now playing at Boston College. How do you let a guy like that slip through the cracks?
I mean, I think like LT's son plays at TCU. I don't know if he's a running back, but like I'm pretty sure I saw that this morning. So, how you let that slide? Pretty unforgivable, and you got to pay the price for it now.
They should have offered that kid a scholarship like the moment he was born. Like
yes.
As soon as his head emerged, like it would have been like sign here, boom, like, binding.
Yeah, like swaddled him in a scholarship offer.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, exactly. It was just, I don't know. I have no words, but. Anyway, 21-day quarantine or 21 days, you have to be away from the program is the rule when you test positive. The main concern there, of course, is Graham Mertz, although several other Wisconsin players are now going to be subject to that same situation. Nebraska game notwithstanding, you look ahead and really from the people I talked to, nobody was too concerned about Nebraska. Nobody's too concerned about next week. It's the Michigan game, which now you're starting to look into like, well, when did exactly Mertz test positive? Because the clock starts in theory right when that happened. Did he test positive after the game Friday night? Did he test positive at 9 a.m. Saturday? In theory, that 21 days could expire within hours of the Michigan game in 3 weeks. So there's still so much information that's really yet to come out where we're not really sure what's going on, but that'll be something to monitor. My question to you, where did this 21-day rule come from? And I'm not attacking this as like a bitter Wisconsin fan, this doesn't make sense, but like why 21 days as opposed to some of the rules that we've seen in other sports like the NFL?
Right. And it's been stark even compared to other college football conferences. Like right. It's closer to like a 10 to 14 day window. And I think the way that like, I think it was Jeff Patrikas, one of the Wisconsin beat writers, was laying it out was essentially you quarantine for 10 days, absolutely no physical contact, physical activity with the team, anything like that. And there's like an added ramp up window so that you're not going from being physically inactive to game action too quickly. But it's looking like it was and it was also to something where you can keep an eye on like the myocarditis thing. That's obviously that was one of the bigger sticking points earlier on in whether the Big Ten would even get this season rolling. And Ross Dellinger, one of the ace college football writers out there, had an article yesterday just about how infrequently that seems to be showing up on the players that are testing positive. So it feels like the 21-day rule might actually just get readdressed here in season. And I know that Barry Alvarez was definitely not opposed to maybe taking a second look at that. I think I saw a quote from him. So it wouldn't shock me if come 2 weeks from now, when it is Michigan week for Wisconsin, that this 21-day rule has been struck down and it's more in line with the 10 to 14 days that we've seen in other conferences.
So the other major non-game news item that came across fairly late last night, Texas definitively not back on the field. Really right now, not back off the field either. Quinn Ewers, the number one overall prospect, obviously the number one quarterback as well in the class of 2022. So he's a high school junior right now, decommits from the Longhorns. I was very impressed with the Notes app post that he sent out on Instagram and Twitter. It was very well edited. The punctuation, if anything, there were too many commas, but really went against the usual template for what you see with those. So very impressive on the grammar front. But already, the minute that he posted that, you look at the replies and it's Ohio State, Ohio State. He's coming to Ohio State. That's where 247 is now projecting Ewers. I mean, obviously this would be a huge gain for Ohio State, but it feels like a bigger loss for Texas with Ewers being an in-state kid.
Right. I mean, you figured that even if Ohio State wasn't able to pluck Ewers from Texas, like they would still end up being okay at quarterback, no matter who they ended up with in the 2022 cycle. But this was going to be like a huge building block for the Texas program. Like this was supposed to be the biggest quarterback recruit that they've gotten since Vince Young. So probably the biggest recruit period that they've gotten since Vince Young. He had been committed for a little while. Now he's not, and it looks again like, he's going to Tom Herman's old stomping grounds at Ohio State. So like a double kick to the pants there. And watch some of the film. I mean, these 5-star kids, it's hard to like really separate them out. They all look just so dominant versus whatever competition they're facing. But this kid looks like he's worth the hype and worth like half of college football Twitter like freaking out last night because he was, leaving the Texas program and all signs like getting crystal balled over to Ohio State. That's like a double huge loss for Texas. And again, Texas just like, I mean, you can't completely lock down the state of Texas as a program recruiting wise,
as we've seen.
But I mean, when Texas is like losing big names from local program or from like local high schools, like Garrett Wilson, I believe is an Austin native. And now he's lighting it up at Ohio State. Like that's not a great look that a team from Ohio can come in and pluck your best guys and you can't get them from your backyard.
Yeah, and you wonder, what prompted that exactly. It's not like Texas is coming off of back-to-back national titles or anything. Like what was the straw that finally broke the camel's back? And we may never know. Maybe the Oklahoma game, maybe just the general vibes around that program, but not a great sign certainly, because I mean that could be a linchpin too for other commits, in next year's class or 2022. Right. All right, let's get to the games from Week 8. Let's stick with the Big Ten. Michigan, Minnesota. This was the headliner on Saturday night. For the first time in a long time, I just found myself, chilling. My girlfriend was out of town. I was able to watch wire to wire, start to finish this game. And it was a thorough Michigan Wolverines victory, 49-24. Joe Milton looked very good. Tanner Morgan did not look very good. Some uncharacteristic, panic type throws for him. Only have one pick, but had a couple others that were pretty close. I wouldn't say Minnesota, completely laid an egg. I really felt like it was more Michigan just playing a hell of a lot better than almost anyone I think expected that they would look in Week 1.
Yeah, I think that's the right way to put it. Michigan definitely has some pieces there. It looks like their defense and their pass rush is going to be pretty nasty throughout the year. And a lot of people who know the X's and O better than I do say it looks like Milton is able to run what they were hoping to run under Shea Patterson, and the numbers bear that out. I mean, he looked very good both as a runner and as a passer on Saturday. So yeah, it looks like just when I was ready to be out on Michigan, they pull me back in. So impressive win for them. I was mostly paying attention to, because the Dogs and the Ravens were off last weekend, focused my football attention on those Maryland Terrapins and watch them.
That was not good.
Get absolutely eviscerated by Northwestern. So that's what I was mostly paying attention to. But every time I flipped over to the Minnesota-Michigan game, I just could not believe how good Michigan looked relative to my expectations. And yeah, Minnesota, maybe a little bit of a paper tiger last year and lost some guys on defense, lost Tyler Johnson. So maybe they're due for a step back this year anyway. But either way, very, very convincing stuff from Michigan. And now they get to go up against Michigan State, who they lost to Rutgers. So.
Yeah, that's 1AA Michigan State.
That's right.
The story really, too, for Michigan, and I guess partially for the Minnesota defense, was the big plays on the ground. Joe Milton looked good through the air, but only had 225 yards, only had one touchdown. It was Haskins and Charbonnet just ripping off long runs. I mean, 159 of Michigan's 256 yards came on 3 plays. And it seemed like Minnesota would answer back with a touchdown or a field goal. and immediately would just give up a huge play, and all of a sudden Michigan's down at the 8-yard line, ready to score again. It was, I think Minnesota's defense was more the issue, and kind of sent that offense into a zone that it really didn't want to be for most of that second half. Having to take more chances than a Minnesota team would prefer to have had to do at that point in the game. Shifting to the Alabama game, this is a huge win for Alabama. I mean, if you just look at the score, you look at the box score, nothing really remarkable. But first play of this game, and this sparked a debate on Twitter of should players this good be returning kicks? But Jalen Waddle suffers a lower body injury, and he's now done for the year. This was one where you kind of felt like, having seen the play, that's where this was going. Not a surprise when that was announced. Top 3 electric player in college football.
Yep.
I think he was probably my favorite player to watch this year. So a massive loss from a viewership standpoint. Obviously, if any team has the skill players to survive something like this, it is Alabama. But even then, I mean, I think you don't need Jalen Waddle to beat Tennessee. You don't need Jalen Waddle to beat Vanderbilt. You might not even need Jalen Waddle to beat a team like Florida, in the SEC title game. But where you need him is when you find yourself in that playoff and you're playing Ohio State and you're playing Clemson and teams that can match you skill-wise. All of a sudden, not having that piece becomes a pretty major issue, I think.
Absolutely. So yeah, I don't mind him playing on special teams. That's what they've been doing. So I mean, why change it? Tennessee's field always seems to be the site for catastrophic injuries. Not saying anything, just saying. But they do have like a morgue underneath the field there. Very weird.
Yeah, is what it is.
But yeah, I mean, I absolutely hated seeing that. I was actually. So after that game kicked off, I drove home from the office here to finish up the rest of my work day. And, I just see like the DMs on my phone. It's like, oh, Jalen Waddle, dude, like, oh my God. And I see the play. I see that he's getting loaded into an ambulance like very quickly after the injury happened.
Almost never a good sign when the ambulance shows up.
Yeah, it's like, oh, no way. And then, Saban said he was out for the season at halftime. Like that's a pretty quick and decisive turnaround this was very, very obvious that what needed to happen there. So absolutely hated seeing that. And I think, yeah, to your larger point, this is going to be a major factor, not between now and December, but, come December or later on in the season when it's playoff time. And you need to have multiple threats to really push like the Clemson secondary or push the Ohio State secondary. That's where Waddle's impact is going to be felt the most. Devontae Smith obviously can really carry the load. John Mechie has been, I think, the big pleasant surprise for them so far. But they're going to need to find that next guy. I know they've recruited well, of course. So I think that they should have, some high 4-star or 5-star floating around ready to get his shot. And you just got to give credit to Alabama's ability to evaluate its talent. Like they don't only get the 5-star receivers, but they all end up playing like them. So they pick them. They know how to pick them there. And I imagine we'll see one of these guys start to pop here as their season continues on Saturday.
Yeah, Mechie was Mechie even a 5-star? I think he was like a kind of a mid-tier 4-star.
Yeah, I think
I
that's
was shocked
right.
to see that. I looked that up on Saturday. I couldn't believe it.
Yeah, I think Devontae Smith might have even been, less than a 5-star too. I think he was, number 3 out of that like super class of Judy, Ruggs, and him. Like I'm pretty sure he was the lightest recruited of that group. So yeah, it's not always just that they're getting the number 1 receiving prospect. They just know who really is like the not hidden gem, but like the guy that might be overlooked relative to where he actually is.
Yeah, I mean we can't all get Dorial Green Beckham.
I still think he could have been good. I don't know.
He was kind of the OG like Donovan Peoples-Jones, where like no matter what, he could resurface in the NFL as like a 35-year-old in a couple of years, and I'd be like, yeah, I think he still got it.
No, yeah, like that's a savvy move by that GM. I would absolutely, I would believe that unironically.
Rondale Moore, kind of a weird, borderline mysterious as Halloween approaches situation going on there. He didn't get a lot of news ahead of the game, but he doesn't end up suiting up for Purdue's victory on Saturday. And as of 2 days ago, we got some comments from like Purdue players that were asked, like, where's Rondale Moore? Is he practicing? And they just said, like, I don't know, he's out. And it's not clear if he's out just for that practice, if he's going to be out for this week, if he's going to be out indefinitely. Do you have any read on what's going on right now?
There's been some sentiment that, like it could be he did opt out. Is there some sort of eligibility concern with him? Like, did he hire an agent, and is that a problem? I mean, like, I just think that like Rashad Bateman was able to opt out and opt back in without really any problems. So I don't understand what makes it different in Moore's case. So I'm not sure the validity of like that particular theory. He is a guy that, as awesome as he is, I mean, he did miss most of the season last year with an injury. Purdue is within their rights technically to stay mum on the nature of the injury here and the extent of it. So I guess they're going to keep doing it, but the longer it goes on, like you were saying, just the weirder and weirder like it feels, and like the more I think like national eyes are going to be on the story of like why aren't you saying anything about Rondell Moore?
Yeah. Can only run for so long, Purdue. You cannot hide.
Yeah.
So Notre Dame played, I think, its best game of the season so far by a pretty fair margin on Saturday against Pittsburgh. 45-3 was the score in that one. I mean, there was a little bit of momentum maybe for Pittsburgh, potentially pulling that upset. That was put to bed pretty easily and pretty early in that game. Ian Book, 312 yards, 3 touchdowns, no picks, QBR almost at 100 for him. Great game for Ian Book. Okay game on the ground for Notre Dame, but defensively and through the air is where they really won this one.
Exactly, yeah. And, I think that even though the run game didn't really get going, I think you're not so much discouraged by that because Pittsburgh's run defense has been so good this year. You were concerned coming into this game through Notre Dame's first 4 or 5 games, whatever it was, that Ian Book just hadn't been producing at all through the air. He had at once not been overly accurate, and then also just not throwing touchdowns, not being overly efficient. And he goes ahead and really gets himself on track on Saturday. The connection with Skowronek, the Notre Dame, the Northwestern transfer, that looks like it's going to be a thing now that Skowronek is healthy, was hurt a little bit earlier on in the season. So that's huge for them, getting their passing game ready, because they got another kind of light test this week. I think a lighter one than the Pittsburgh one going up against Georgia Tech this week. But Clemson awaits on the other side of that one. So making sure that passing game had at least some sort of momentum going into the Clemson game was huge for them. So getting it done against Pittsburgh, very good sign that for the Irish moving forward, I think.
So last week, you were all over Iowa State and Oklahoma State being a defensive battle. And I think for the most part, you were right. I mean, score-wise, 24-21, Oklahoma State, a low-scoring game, certainly by the standards that these teams have established over the last decade or so. 3 combined picks for Brock Purdy and Spencer Sanders. Chuba Hubbard and Breece Hall both went off. Chuba 140 yards and a touchdown, Breece Hall 185 and a touchdown. But you were right to avoid both of those quarterbacks and to avoid, for the most part, the receivers for each team.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's been a very strange year, and these two teams both have legit defenses. OK State's very experienced, and Iowa State's, very just kind of disciplined. So they play a good brand of defense there for the most part. So yeah, I mean, the fact that Hall and Hubbard were able to go off, I think that they would go off against almost anybody in the Big 12. But again, yeah, I mean, just 45 combined points in a game where in a lot of years you would expect that to be maybe the losing score for one of the teams. It was pretty wild to see. So it felt like I was watching a slugfest. That was the game that I had on for most of the late afternoon, especially after the Waddle injury for Alabama. So yeah, it's Oklahoma State. They got Spencer Sanders back. They survived another one. Now their season starts to get a little bit tougher from here on. It starts this weekend at Texas, or against Texas. But either way, Oklahoma State, the road keeps setting up well for them if they don't screw it up to win the Big 12 as an undefeated team, which is pretty wild. But I mean, it looks like they have the pieces to do it.
Speaking of undefeated teams, the number 7 Cincinnati Bearcats. We've talked about a few teams over the last few weeks that, by way of the Big 10 and the Mountain West and the Pac-12, kind of slowly entering the field. You're going to see some rankings that aren't really maybe as legitimate as they would be in a normal year. Is Cincinnati the 7th best team in the country?
They might be, man. I mean, they have some serious dudes on that team. They have a ton of experience and returned talent, and they've had a runway up to this point, and they've pretty much smashed everyone that they've gone up against. Very impressive. So I'm in. I think that they are at the very least the best group of 5 team, and probably the best group of 5 team maybe since 2018 or something like that. I mean, I don't know if they're quite to the level of that Central Florida team from 2017, but either way, they look awesome. The defense is really, really nasty. That, like Pro Football Focus has a bunch of their players graded extremely highly. Desmond Ridder, I don't think has even played his best ball yet at quarterback. They just got Alec Pierce back, the receiver. So they got a lot of guys that I think haven't even hit their full stride just yet. So, I mean, that's a scary proposition. Like, they're going to end the year with like a fairly emphatic undefeated record, I think, at this stage. I'd be surprised if anyone can knock them off. I mean, they really took it to SMU last week, which is to hold that offense in check the way that it did is no small feat. Yeah,
not since the days of, was it Tony Pike? Was their quarterback like circa 08?
That sounds right.
Yeah. Run? Yeah, I think Zach Colaros maybe made an appearance. Obviously, this was pre-Munchie era. But yeah, it's a fun Cincinnati
Gunnar
team.
Kiel as well.
Gunnar Kiel. Oh my. That is not a Cincinnati, not an Ohio name, Gunnar Kiel. That is like pure Big 12 or SEC.
Yeah, it should have been. He's the guy that he committed to like everybody at one point, and then ends up just kind of like flaming out at Cincinnati. Very weird.
We've all been there. That guy. All right, let's go back to the Big Ten real quickly before we look ahead to Week 9. We had a couple of upsets. Rutgers. I guess it's an upset because anytime Rutgers wins a conference game, it's an upset. But
yes,
dude, this Michigan State team is terrible. Like, I don't feel like Michigan State blew this game by any means. I feel like they just got absolutely bodied by the better team at home.
Yes, I think so. I think I have some faith and optimism that like Mel Tucker will end up being a good enough hire for Michigan State. But I think it speaks to how like bare the cupboard is that D'Antonio left for them, because he must have, I don't have the numbers right in front of me, but he must have really slipped on the recruiting trail in recent years. It did feel like he did, especially compared to like the middle of the decade when they were pulling like pretty legit recruiting classes, not just by like Michigan State standards, but like by their own standards. They're like beating Michigan for guys, whatever it is, that they just aren't that talented right now. They're probably like the 5th or 6th most talented team in that division potentially. So, I mean, that was a very sobering look at the current state of that program. And given the way that, that school from across the state played with Michigan, this could be just a really brutal opening start to the season for Michigan State. And, maybe they're the team that only ends up with like 1 or 2 Big Ten wins this year.
Well, seriously, I mean, if you can't beat Rutgers, I mean, this is, I think, by far the most winnable game on your schedule. Like, you look at the rest of the Big Ten right now. I mean, you're not beating Wisconsin, you're not beating Ohio State, you're not beating Penn State. Like, I think after watching Indiana, you're not beating them. Like, the list of beatable teams for a team that loses by 2 scores to Rutgers, shrinks pretty fast.
Yeah, you got Maryland left. That's your only hope.
That might be the only one. Let's talk about Indiana, Purdue. I think this was the ending of the week for sure, and I think maybe gave us like the play of the year so far in terms of memeability and just kind of memorable type of plays. I mean, this was obviously we talked about last week about Penn State, without Journey Brown, without Micah Parsons, a little bit behind the 8 ball, but I think talent-wise, there was no question that they would still be able to take care of business against a team like Indiana. I think maybe they would have some issues against the Michigans and the Ohio States and the Wisconsins of the conference, but for as good of a team as Indiana is, I don't think many people really gave them much of a shot. But I mean, this was another situation where I wouldn't say the better team necessarily won just because of the talent with Penn State, but it again didn't really feel like all that much of a fluke.
No. I mean, they were going back and forth throughout the game, so I mean, it didn't feel like some sort of weird lucky horseshoe type of thing was going on with Indiana. Like, they were going back and forth with them and making it happen. So it was impressive throughout. And Penn State's defense, I thought, played pretty well, but Indiana was able to convert when they needed to and make it happen that way. And I guess when we talked about them last, Indiana, like, they're a team that is really experienced, had like a ton of returning guys. I mean, starting at the quarterback position and starting running back, you're starting tight end, your top two receivers, all those guys are back. Like that's huge. So a lot of cohesiveness, and it all results in them pushing that game to overtime. And it didn't even need to get there. Like Penn State needed to do some things at the end of that game to make it there. Penn State scores in overtime. And I love the strat. Like when you're not as talented as the other team man to man, the shorter you can make the game, the better. So like going for two there, it seems ballsy, but I think it's also the right call, because like the longer that you wait around, the more likely that something bad is going to happen, and you end up getting stopped or turning it over, and the other team just converts and ends the game because they just simply have more guys than you. So if you're hot, and things are going your way, just go for it. And they did it. And Mike Penix with the incredible reach to hit the pylon just barely, and that was amazing. Like that that was like the closest call you can like possibly have at the pylon, right? I mean, that just insane.
I don't even know if it was the right call, but I don't
either, but you couldn't reverse it.
Yeah, exactly. That was a call on the field stance, and I don't see how you could definitively argue either way. I know there were some people that said, the ball, or was it his hand or the ball had hit out of bounds? I think it was his hand, but the ball, he's kind of gripping the ball halfway up, and I think it was the right call. Like if I absolutely had to make a decision on it, I am totally fine with the one that was made.
I am too. I know it stinks for Penn State, and Penn State also lost Noah Cain from that game. So like that's going to make this weekend's game against Ohio State even tougher. But yeah, I mean, overall, just like what an awesome, like the Big Ten really had some like fun, entertaining games to get things rolling. They weren't always the most competitive, but like pretty like memorable moments and performances for the first weekend from them.
Unfortunately, we get a bit of a contrast as we look ahead to week 9. We only have one ranked versus ranked, and that is Ohio State, Penn State. And that one, in a normal year, we'd be looking at probably a Halloween whiteout in Happy Valley. It would be one of the games of the year. But with the injuries and some of the defections that Penn State has had, and of course the loss last week, this one isn't quite what it looked like, I think, when the schedule first came out. And Ohio State, 12.5-point favorite on the road. I will say I'm a little surprised that number is not higher, especially given the fact that it's not really a true road game.
Yeah, I'm a little surprised by that too. I mean, like the home field advantage, like you mentioned, gets a little bit sapped. Got a number here from Chris Falika, the Bear from ESPN. James Franklin teams are 7-1 against the spread, with 3 outright wins and 2 1-point losses in their last 8 games as an underdog. So his team has been a double-digit home dog 4 times, and he's won once outright, and the other 2 have been by a touchdown or less. So he plays close no matter what, especially when his team is underdogs. But I think that they're not just underdogs this week. Like I think they are too undermanned. Like I think when we talked about this game potentially earlier on in the offseason, how it would determine the Big Ten East, that would have come with a full strength squad that had Micah Parsons and had Journey Brown and Noah Cain. Like they don't have that. So I think that Ohio State might crush them. So I'm in on the double digit win here for the Buckeyes. I know that some of those against the spread games that were from those stats, the ones that they lost were just closer losses to Ohio State. I just think Ohio State is too good overall this year to lose this game to Penn State, or let alone like really have this one even be all that competitive, especially when there's no energy in Happy Valley. Like usually, like that's like they have like one of the best home field advantages. Like a couple of years ago, that game they really had a chance to beat Ohio State and that great Chase Young team. But yeah, this time around, not so much.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. We get Texas, Oklahoma State. A pretty appealing game in the Big 12 as Oklahoma State, kind of tries to continue its march potentially to that conference title. Then Oklahoma, Texas Tech, another pretty good one in Lubbock. But yeah, for the Big 10, it's a lot of, good team against bad team outside of that Ohio State, Penn State matchup. And it's kind of the same in the SEC. Your Dogs are back in action after the bye, but they're at Kentucky. Not a lot to see with Clemson this week, 32-point favorites at home against Boston College. It's going to be a fun week. Something's going to happen. There's going to be an upset. It's kind of hard to pinpoint maybe where that comes this week.
Yeah, so a lot of the times when we do get the lack of like the marquee matchups, we do end up getting very fun games. So that there are a few that we can identify that way, but yeah, there isn't a lot here that like moves the needle from like a national perspective. So yeah, we don't get treated the same way that we did last week or 2 weeks ago with number 2 versus number 3 or anything like that. Just one ranked matchup, like you said, that has already kind of lost some of its luster off of it, the way that things went in the offseason and after the season opener. So it'll be one that you can definitely appreciate this slate, but it'll come from nowhere. It'll be a game that you're not expecting is going to be the one that people remember from this weekend.
All right, what do you say we take a look at the DFS slate for Week 9? We'll start out not at the QB position, but I want to take kind of a more of an overhead look at what this slate looks like. Games you're targeting, spreads you're targeting, totals that you like, any position groups that you'll maybe be taking a look at?
Yes. So I'm starting off with the Louisville Virginia Tech game. Virginia Tech kind of let me down last week against Wake Forest, but that's all right. Louisville, on the other hand, looked awesome against Florida State. I expect that to continue. I think this is a really good setup. I think Louisville is at home, and they've played a lot better at home this year than they have on the road, so that bodes well for them. And I think there's going to be a lot of points in this one. I think they have the highest total on the board at 67, and you look at that, and it's a spread of only 3.5 points. So like there's an expectation that there's going to be plenty of offense from both sides here. So love that game to target. Virginia Tech and Louisville both have like the 4th and 5th worst run defenses of any team on this slate, and it's a big slate. So I think that's definitely noteworthy, especially with how good these run games are. Ole Miss carries most of the total going up against Vanderbilt. Vanderbilt will kind of have like some sneaky values here because like they haven't had much in the way of any production, but Mississippi can let anybody score. So that'll be kind of fun. And then, of course, Ole Miss, their offense should get back on track. Clemson, like you said, very, very high implied total, at 46.5 this week. Iowa State, they get Kansas, so that's good. I mean, I think that all facets of that offense should be able to take off this week. Notre Dame, 38.5 implied total against Georgia Tech. I think they can hit that as well, as long as they don't do a look ahead to Clemson. If they keep their heads down and just play their game, I think that they should be able to hang close to 40 on Georgia Tech.
All right, so at the quarterback position, Sam Ehlinger, Brady White at Memphis, and Trevor Lawrence are your top 3. Is there a chance that you're fading all 3 of those guys? And if so, where else on this board are you looking at the QB position?
I think I am, and it's because, I don't think that any of these guys hit their optimal range of outcomes. Ehlinger, kind of a tough-ish matchup on the road against Oklahoma State. He was really, really inaccurate last week, and I think that could continue. Again, OK State's defense needs some respect put on its name. Brady White, I think Cincinnati could just smush this Memphis offense. And so I don't expect this to go particularly well for Memphis on Saturday. So White, with that sinking 9,700 into him would be a mistake in my book. And Trevor Lawrence, again, the rotating wheel of, does he put up enough points for it to really matter to you in however long he's playing? I think that they're going to handle Boston College better than they did Syracuse last week. Syracuse really gave them all it could handle, but still ended up being a fairly comfortable win for Clemson, even though they didn't cover the 43. But either way, I don't think that Lawrence is going to be I'm going after, because also I just love the high-priced running backs this week. So to do that, you need to get some value at quarterback. So that's a tier that I'm going to be mostly avoiding.
Anybody, when you look lower down on the board, if you want to really save, if you have a lineup where you want to go all in on, on the other skill positions, any quarterbacks south of like 7,500 that you'll be looking at?
Yeah, I mean, let's see. Ian Book is at 7K, and he's in a really good position. Like I talked about earlier, I think that this Georgia Tech offense shouldn't be too much trouble. It looked like Ian Book got back on track this past week, and he's got some established pass catchers now. So he's in a rhythm, and he's also always a threat to run one in. So I like him a fair bit. kind of bouncing around here. I still like Hendon Hooker, even though last week didn't go very well for him. I think that he bounces back this week against Louisville. That's a big way to get some exposure to that game. And Mikhail Cunningham on the other side of that one, I like a fair bit. Those guys are both north of 7,500. However, LSU, they give up the most yards per attempt of any defense on this slate. I still can't justify going with Bo Nix. I could see him melting down in this game. I think you could go after some of the Auburn pieces once again, like Seth Williams, Anthony Schwartz, Tank Bigsby, but Nix is someone I'm not particularly interested in. If you want to get real weird with it, which I often do, Rutgers, Indiana has both the quarterbacks in that game are 6,100 apiece. We got Mike Penix, and we got Noah Vidral, former Central Florida guy, followed Frost to Nebraska, didn't get the playing time, of course, with Adrian Martinez being there. So now he's at Rutgers. He looked relatively impressive. He's got kind of like that Scott Frost dual threat ability. He's got a little bit of weapons around him, and I just don't think there's going to be a ton of defense in this game. I think a lot of those turnovers from Michigan State last week were self-inflicted more than like Rutgers being suddenly this like absolute wagon on defense. So there should be a lot of points in this one, and I think both quarterbacks will be able to. I mean, you're not needing a ton from them. If they can both give you 20 points apiece and you can really crush with your other skill position guys with those savings, then I think it works out. So I will have one lineup with both of them, and then I think I will play, like one of the guys from this game along with like a more high-priced quarterback too. So don't completely just scroll past the Indiana-Rutgers game because I think there's some value there.
All right, so at the running back position, you mentioned targeting that Kansas defense mercilessly, and typically that tends to work out for teams with the exception of the Todd Reesing year. Breece Hall, accordingly, is the number one running back. He's at 9,100 on DraftKings. The spread in that game is 28. The implied total for Iowa State is 40. So there's a good chance that we see Breece Hall for at least 2.5, 3 quarters in this game. Is that enough for you to trust him at that price?
He gets so many carries like right to start things off. So they're going to feed him. Like he could be at the requisite, 15 to 20 carries by like midway through the second quarter. Like that's just how big of a staple in that offense he is. It's not Brocktober. It's Breece-tober. Breece Hall is going to absolutely like eviscerate Kansas. Yeah, I know. Come on.
There's got to be like a Breester kind of Easter Sunday type of thing going on. I don't know. Unfortunately, we're not playing in April. Yeah. The Breester bunny.
But yes, either way, the 9,100, like it can give you some sticker shock, but Breece Hall versus Kansas, like there's not a whole lot to overthink. Mm-hmm. He could get the value on just 10 carries, but it's not in Iowa State's nature to give him any less than 15 carries, basically, no matter what's going on in the game. So I do like him a fair bit. All the H-named running backs. Khalil Herbert, go back to the well with him out of Virginia Tech. I like his matchup against Louisville. And then on the other side of that game, Javian Hawkins, has been really dominant, had like a huge game last week. He didn't even have like a very high rostered percentage out there, but the matchup was really good. If you had him in your lineup, you probably ended up cashing. I expect him to do similar things to this Virginia Tech defense, so like him a lot. So again, I'm really in on these higher priced running backs for this week.
Mm-hmm. If you do want to save at the running back position, though, where are you going? And I'm talking like bottom of the barrel.
Okay, bottom of the barrel indeed. Let's talk about Vanderbilt. Keon Henry Brooks, just 3,900 out of Vanderbilt, had double-digit carries in their most recent game before they had a bye. Again, Ole Miss, terrible defensively, so I think that this should set up well for him. I don't know if Vandy's going to get a couple of these other pieces back from their backfield, but I think Keon Brooks, again, 3,900. Ole Miss giving up 256.8 rushing yards per game on 5.9 yards per attempt, almost 4 rushing touchdowns per game. So picking the right Vandy guy, none of them are really, salary breakers for you. I think that's a nice way to save up. And then Raheem Blackshear, a guy who used to play for Rutgers, now plays at Virginia Tech, coming off a performance with 11 carries, had a hamstring injury earlier on in the season that he played through but was limited. But he's a guy that Virginia Tech was very excited to get eligible for this season. He's a really talented guy, really talented pass catcher too. So he's just 3,600. I think if you're just buying into the Virginia Tech offense and specifically like the run game, then Blackshear's a really nice way to go about it at 36.
So at the receiver position, it's tough for anybody to really jump out to me. You have Elijah Moore at number one. He's at 8,400. Yeah, pretty big gap between him down to Terrace Marshall at 78. You got Sean Dykes. You got Tylan Wallace. You have Tutu Atwell, of course, at Louisville. You've been on these Auburn guys for the majority of this year, including Seth Williams, who's at 6,000. Is it back to the Auburn well again this week?
I think so. Like I mentioned, LSU has really, really struggled against the pass throughout the entire course of the season. Bo Pelini just not really locking it down there defensively and scheme-wise for them. They did play better this past week. This game is at Auburn, so I think that maybe Bo Nix maybe not be able to just not melt down enough to make this worth it. But yeah, Seth Williams obviously had the huge game last week. Anthony Schwartz continues to see a ton of targets. That's worth something for PPR purposes. So I mean, I like Schwartz just enough. So yeah, I think the going back to the Auburn well makes some sense. Schwartz down at 4,900, so $1,100 difference between him and Williams. Another guy I like this week, I like a lot of these kind of mid-tier receivers. I don't think that paying up at receiver has the highest output potential. Although I mean, Terrace Marshall could obviously dominate, and Tylan Wallace still hasn't totally gotten it into gear yet. But I think staying in like the 6,000 and less range makes some sense. Talking about like Calvin Austin, now that DeMonte Coxey is gone from Memphis, we saw Austin, I think, push for like 14 targets a week ago in his last matchup and did 13.1 yards per target, had 184 yards and a score, and he's just 5,900. So I know that I don't love the Memphis projection this week, but that many targets, that kind of production, I think he should be able to do at least a little something in that game. So look his way. Taekwon Thornton, I think Baylor has some room to put up some numbers on the defense they're going against TCU's pass defense. So he's a really talented guy. He saw a lot of targets last week. He's not a guy that should be averaging 3.9 yards per target. Maybe Baylor makes a quarterback change and things get on track as far as that passing game goes. I do like Taekwon Thornton. Tight end I like Michael Meyer, especially on Halloween. The Notre Dame freshman tight end. He looks kind of, like ridiculous. I mean, he's a 5-star tight end. You only get like a handful of those a year, maybe. Some years you don't even get any. He's really starting to click with Ian Book. I don't think there's anyone on Georgia Tech that can really check him up the seam. Xavier Hutchinson at 5,500. Again, if you want to get a little piece of the Iowa State passing game, I don't know how much of Brock Purdy I'm going to have, but Hutchinson is getting basically all the targets that are going to their wide receivers. They go to the tight end a lot, so Charlie Kohler is someone to pay attention to as well. But Hutchinson, good yards per target and good target share, so I like him a lot. Whop Phillier and Peyton Hendershot, the Indiana guys, of course, going up against Rutgers. I like them. And I think, again, that Alec Pierce just made his season debut for Cincinnati, but he was one of their best players all of last season, has been that for a little while now. He's down at 4,200. Again, I think that Cincinnati should be able to crush Memphis, and I think that Pierce, all things being equal, should be that number one guy in this passing game. So it wouldn't surprise me if he kind of wakes back up and starts to do the things that we were expecting when healthy coming into the season.
So let's finish out with the state of the dogs right now, John. Technically, it's been over a week, but you're coming off the Alabama loss.
Sure.
Back on October 17th. You had a bye this past week. Any chance that this Kentucky game is a trap, looking ahead to Florida on November 7th?
That's a good point about it being a trap potentially. And then, you could also look at how bad Kentucky looked a week ago, and maybe they don't take them as seriously. But I think also Georgia just went through 2 weeks of being constantly reminded what happened to them against Alabama. So catching them coming off of that, even though there's a bye in between, I think that Georgia should come out, hungry and playing sharp, and should be a little bit healthier. It is probably going to be Stetson Bennett once again, so it looks like they aren't going to make that quarterback change. So that limits, again, the overall outlook of this passing game. But Kentucky, can run the clock out on themselves. One thing I will say though, and we've talked about him before, Joey Gatewood, I think, is going to start this game for Kentucky, and that's a bit of a wild card. We haven't seen him start for Kentucky yet, but Terry Wilson is banged up, unlikely to play. Gatewood, so much athleticism, so much size. So Georgia better be ready for that because, I mean, we've seen them struggle against backup quarterbacks before, multiple times, and it hasn't necessarily been against Kentucky, but I think that Gatewood is legit. I think that Gatewood on a balance of talent probably is better than Bo Nix. At least I'll venture that guess right now.
Is he better than Stetson Bennett?
Yeah.
More talented. Okay.
At least more talented. I'll say, maybe this is just a tinfoil hat thing, but I mean, there is a political implication to starting Bo Nix or having Bo Nix win that job last year. I mean, his dad played there. He's like he was supposed to be the second coming for Auburn. So it didn't surprise me that Nix ended up winning that job. And with him being a freshman, it made sense for Gatewood to go somewhere else. And him landing at Kentucky, I think, is a really good spot for him. So I think that he will be a good SEC quarterback here moving forward. This is a tough spot for him. And I'm being a little bit facetious about how worried I am, but it wouldn't surprise me if he makes things a little bit uncomfortable for Georgia on Saturday. So they need to come out and play sharp.
Is it pretty much just the Florida game or bust the rest of the year now? I mean, after that, it's Missouri, Mississippi State, South Carolina, Vanderbilt.
Yeah, once upon a time, I was worried about the Miss State game. Boy,
not so much.
That program is literally falling apart right now. It's everybody's leaving.
I've enjoyed your weekly tweet recap of what exactly is burning down.
It's important to keep track.
Yeah.
And it always seems like it's somebody new. But I think that Florida game coming up in November will kind of be the determining factor, and that, as per usual, that should decide the East. That's the way it's been for going on 6-7 years now. So I think that will kind of be the de facto SEC East championship game, and then you get the right to play presumably Alabama in the SEC title game. So Georgia has the road laid out for them. Got to get through the first checkpoint though and beat Kentucky on Saturday.
All right, man. Enjoy the games on Saturday. I know I will, and we will talk next week.
Likewise.